YouTube. Hi, Spotify. It's Kel, and I'm coming to you today with another video. We're actually going to repeat the video that we did the other day because I don't know, I think I've mentioned this before, but I am actually on a very long road trip. I've been on a road trip continuously for the last almost 3 months now, since the beginning of April, continuously, and I've been all around. I went to Oregon, all different places in Oregon. Now I'm in Southern California, and as many of you know, I have lived in Idaho, but so right now I'm in Southern California. And so one of the things is I have been doing this podcast just kind of like wherever I have mobile Wi-Fi with me, but just wherever I can get the best Wi-Fi. And especially, so I have mobile Wi-Fi, but some days that signal is not the most consistent. And so I thought it was consistent and good the other day, but then when I posted the podcast, I saw when I played it back that it was not so great. So we're gonna actually just kind of like repeat the information that I gave in the podcast the other day, because it really was so glitchy that I can't it was good on the audio, but the video was not great. So hopefully it'll be a little more congruent today and tolerable to and digestible. And so basically what we're talking about is the third video in the series on perfectionism. And we're talking about treatment intervention. So basically we've talked about, what is it? What does it look like? What are some root causes of it? And today we're going to talk about what do you do with that? How can you treat it? And especially, there's definitely a lot of ways you can treat it with a therapist. And we're also going to talk about some unique ways you can at least have some like ways you can journal about it, or things you can do at home to do some growth work on your own if you do not feel like going to a therapist about it. So let's get right into it. Now, the first thing that we talked about was irrational core beliefs and how those can be a factor in creating perfectionism. And that is one area. You're going to hear me say this a few times throughout this podcast, but there are a few areas where I would just say it is best dealt with a therapist, because again, a therapist should know more about how to treat cognitive behavioral therapy and rational core beliefs, um, than maybe a person who has never heard of those things would. So I would personally work with a therapist and go to a therapist and say, hey, I struggle a little bit with perfectionism, and I think I have these rational core beliefs of like, I need to be perfect to be lovable, or, and so can you help me with those? And maybe even like, when you're reaching out to a therapist, ask them, hey, do you have experience working with people who struggle with perfectionism? So, and do you work on addressing irrational core beliefs? So those are some things, the ways to make sure that you get your needs met when working with a therapist. But I would say that's one route to go. And the way that you would do that with a therapist is, if you're working with in the realm of cognitive behavioral therapy, it basically identifies evidence to the contrary and helps you work on refuting and replacing those irrational beliefs that you may hold, such as, I need to be perfect to be loved. So, you would identify what is a better, more accurate, rational belief, and trying to replace the old beliefs with the new beliefs. Okay, so that would be one element of an intervention that you could do to work on your perfectionism. Okay. Another one is the integration and the acceptance of your shadow side. Now, this is one area I'm going to actually give a shout out to Chat GPT a few times in this video. And again, I'm sure a lot of people are like, can't believe she's doing that, but really, I will say Chat GPT has actually shocked me in the one specific area that I really love about it is being able to come up with, if you give it the right prompt, it can really help you come up with great journal questions for yourself. So this is an example of integrating and accepting your shadow side. So you could put into a prompt for Chat GPT. You could say, hey, Chat GPT, can you help me come up with a list of questions that I can journal about that would help me integrate and accept my shadow side, because I struggle with perfectionism, or just, whatever, just to integrate and accept my shadow side. And I've actually tested it and it came up with a great list of questions. And so that is something you can do at home in the privacy of your own home. You don't have to share that with anybody. If you want to work on weaknesses or things you consider vulnerabilities or imperfections without sharing it with anybody, and work on accepting that in yourself, or the root causes if you feel unlovable, that is a great way to start. So just to get to know in yourself, where did that come from, So another way, we've talked about the good and bad exercise, where you can list your strengths on one side of a piece of paper and then your weaknesses on the other. That's just another good visual example of accepting your shadow side. What are your weaknesses? What and understanding that we all humans have good and bad, and just understanding that if we have a holistic view of ourselves, it's going to include both the things we love about ourselves and also the things we maybe don't like about ourselves. And what are those things and how can we accept them, but also still strive to change them? It doesn't mean we're just going to sit in them and be like, well, that's the way I am. No, you can actually still work on changing them. But, you, um, want to just know that they're there and accept them at the same time, right? So, and that helps you see that way when someone else calls you out on them, you can say, yeah, that's true. I do have that trait. Or, and especially someone, but I am working on it and this is how I'm working on it. Or so that way you don't get defensive, thinking that you need to be perfect, right? So, another thing we talked about is parental role modeling of perfectionism. And again, this is going to be best explored in therapy, because each individual circumstance is different and it will really help you to get to know your parents and the effects that they had on you. And again, this is not to say parents are bad if they modeled perfectionism. A lot of times it can be really, really great parents who were just trying to be really positive for their children, but sometimes maybe didn't model how to deal with negative feelings, or whatever they considered their imperfections to be, right? Didn't model exactly, showing people how to communicate with their shadow side. So here's another one. The perfection or parentification of the children, and or caretaking. So an intervention that you can really work on if you struggle or you think you were parentified as a child or had to take care of your siblings a lot is really tapping into your own childlike states. So you identifying what it is in you that really feels like it's carefree activities. What for you feels like, quote unquote playing. So for people who feel like they grew up too fast, they can actually have a hard time, believe it or not, letting loose, or playing and not being super responsible all the time. And so, and also another element of that is being vulnerable, right? Because if they're the ones that have to have it all together all the time, then vulnerability may not come easily to them. So both, trying to access your playful, carefree side and also your vulnerable side. And again, this goes back to like the id, the ego, and the super ego. So typically parentified children, they lean into their super ego. And so this is all about balance and how to tap into your id side, your childlike side. And so that's just, you have to ask yourself, you maybe make a list of activities. What feels like playfulness to me? Is it going and playing a hobby? Is it like walking through a park barefoot? Is it swinging on a swing? Is it, this sounds silly, but is it art, or is it Play-Doh, or is it, really some of those things can be very healing for very parentified people, because it may seem like a waste of time, but it's actually just showing people how to let loose and get in touch with their creative side and not be so really rigid, So that is one way to, tap in or reduce your perfectionistic tendencies, right? And just get in touch with your more quote free side. So another thing that we talked about as a cause for perfectionism is reliance on external validation. And so, or people pleasing. And so a couple things you can do are create a list of positive affirmations for yourself so that you focus on, and this goes hand in hand with asking yourself in a certain situation, what do you believe about the situation, instead of relying on what do other people believe about the situation. A lot of times perfectionists can care a lot about what other people think about them rather than how do they believe that they are doing themselves. What is their opinion of themselves versus like what does everybody else think about them. And so a lot of times perfectionists could do a great job on something, but if someone gives them some criticism, that it ruins their day, right? Versus where if they know that if they could just kind of self-validate and give them their own kind of applause and be like, I did a great job. I know I did a great job. I could have done better, but like I also could have done much worse. Then the criticism will not be as devastating because you can give yourself your own flowers, if that makes sense. So, asking yourself, what do I believe about the situation rather than what do they believe about the situation? And also using positive affirmations to really pump yourself up. And it really can create really good, strong neural pathways where you really do start to believe the positive things about yourself, even if you quote have to fake it to make it a little bit in the beginning. Um, and then Another thing that another intervention is a lot of times perfectionists have this quote identity based on having it all together. And so an important part of a perfectionist reducing their perfectionistic tendencies is expanding their identity to being quote known for other things. So like this could mean becoming good but not perfect in other areas of their life. So it could be being getting into sports, even if they're not good at it, and maybe particularly if they're not good at it, but just so they are not just known for, having it all together. I remember I had a client, and we'll do another video on eating disorders at one point, but I had a client who was very strongly perfectionistic and she had an eating disorder, and she had this very strong artistic side, but she never really tapped into it. And so part of our work together was really tapping into her artistic side and creating that more of like enhancing that as more part of her identity. And when we helped her do that, it helped release the pressure on her to be perfect, and it gave her a lot more room in her identity to be imperfect because she had latitude and she had kind of multiple sources of her identity, if that makes sense. She didn't just have to be the perfect one. She could be the interesting, creative, out of the box one and kind of, so it when you have multiple sources of your identity, you rely on perfection to be a less of a strong need to be one, if that makes sense. So I would just say expand sources of identity, for many people it might be spirituality is where you find your identity, as a in your relationship to whatever you consider your higher power. Um and I think that there's just, it could be as an artist, it could be as an athlete, it could be as a wife or a mom or, so there's just a lot of sources of identity that I feel it could be. And the more I think you have and the more like multifaceted you are, the less I think that hopefully the natural need to be perfect and have it all together is. And so just expanding that sense of identity, because for some people if the perfectionist quote having it all together is the quote only thing that they have. I don't know why I'm quoting so much in this video, but so and then the good bad split again is like the all good all bad thinking, either I'm perfect or a failure. And again, that's an irrational core belief and a cognitive distortion. And again, I would work with a therapist. But again, I'm going to give a shout out to ChatGPT because in all of these things, if you get creative about how to give ChatGPT the right prompt and you want to create journal questions for yourself or your child, you can come up with they will actually ChatGPT will come up with a great list of questions for you to journal for your own self-development. And I have to say that's one real thing that I'm pleasantly surprised about, because one question I used to always get from clients was, "Hey, do you have a list of journaling questions that I could do for myself for homework?" And I'm not gonna lie, we would sit there and come up with questions, but it's not as great or as easy as saying, "Hey, let's put this prompt into a chat GPT and come up with like 50 different questions for you so you could have homework forever if you want." And they're great questions. So I would just say, you might even, I haven't even done this prompt, but you might even say to a prompt, "Hey, ChatGPT, can you come up with a list of questions that would help me reduce my perfectionistic tendencies that I could journal about?" I don't know. I haven't done that specific prompt, but I hope it would work for you. I mean, only you can evaluate the questions. But so shout out to ChatGPT for being an adjunct to therapy. I don't ever think it's going to replace therapy because a lot of therapy is just the human to human interaction and the fact that it is a safe human place to be imperfect and to be unconditionally cared about. And that is, Rogers used to always talk about what was called the unconditional positive regard of a therapist to a client. And basically, you can say anything you want and hopefully remain in a non-judged place in the relationship where the a person is just trying to understand you and provide a safe space for you to explore yourself, right? So I don't ChatGPT is never, in my opinion, going to be able to provide that. However, I do believe that it can give good prompts and questions for you to ask yourself for things like journaling or, as like I said, as homework for therapy. And I think that that's great. I think we should work hand in hand with AI. I think, as long as AI is trying to serve humanity, instead of the other way around where, humanity is trying to serve AI, we have the right priority. So I think more power to ChatGPT for giving, hopefully, clients and people a better self-awareness if we can come up with some journal prompts. And so I think that's a great way to use it. Like I said, some of the questions that I've seen that I've actually tried and tested myself, it was a great list of questions that came up. So if you have not gone to a therapist or you're thinking about going to a therapist, that is a good kind of like first step, or it can be good homework. You can even come up if you're doing therapy, you can even come up with the list of questions and go to your therapist and say, "Hey, this was the list of questions. Do you think they're all going to be good ones, or like what, should we?" So I would again shout out to ChatGPT for helping with an as an adjunct to therapy. And I hope that these interventions helped. And again, like I said, you're best honestly going to be working through this issue with a therapist, but you can definitely do some of this work on your own. You can also do some of it through journaling. And I hope this found you well and at least got you intrigued. If you do have some perfectionistic tendencies, sometimes these things can be obstacles to intimacy, such as if you are defensive about, calling out your own weaknesses, your own imperfections because you feel like, you're not going to be loved or something. Sometimes that can get in the way of intimacy. So you just may want to take a little look at it, go to a therapist, journal about it, whatever you need to do. And we all have things that we need to work on when it comes to, intimacy blocks. And I hope that it found you well, and I will be back for another video in the future. And hopefully this one recorded well, and I will see you guys next time.